Hi everybody, I hope we're all doing well. Some of my favorite moments in every Stormlight book so far happens within the last 100 pages. That's not to say there aren't great moments in the rest of the book. You go in knowing, okay, there's going to be a lot of build-up and things are going to progress to a point where it's just so much happening all at once. Pacing in fantasy books in general, there are different expectations. You know, you don't go into epic fantasy expecting thriller pace or, a YA romance expecting fantasy pace. You know, going into a fantasy book, there's going to be likely many characters, multiple points of view, traditional fantasy with a huge emphasis on world building. You know, you don't really go into reading a fantasy book unless you enjoy world building on some level. And epic fantasy, when you are consciously making huge, gigantic books, which Sanderson is doing with the Stormlight Archive, that changes things too. These conceptions about pacing and fantasy make it really interesting and make it an interesting problem for writers to figure out how to address and keep the story moving and keep a sense of progression while also delivering on all of this extra stuff. And I think that generally Sanderson is excellent at doing this. And I think a perfect comparison that can be made is with Words of Radiance and Oathbringer. So I think that in general you could talk about pacing on a small scale and pacing on a very large scale. Sanderson writes chapters in the Stormlight Archive that are short stories almost, and you see that in the interlude chapters. Each chapter often feels like a short story in itself. Often they're self-contained, often sometimes a chapter is meant just to explore the world. We want to see some kind of character interaction, some kind of goal achieved or twist. And I think that's done really well. However, that doesn't feel like there's a lot of continuity from chapter to chapter. And this is really prevalent in Oathbringer, especially when the point of view characters start to expand and expand and expand. And I personally felt like I could read one chapter of Oathbringer and go, yeah, I'm good for the day. You know, that had a nice little arc in that chapter. It's more of a leisurely pace, you know, you want to take your time exploring this book, that's fine, but it becomes hard when the whole macro level plot doesn't get resolved until the last couple of chapters. And especially when you've become used to that formula in the first two books, you know, like, okay, there's going to be a lot of treading water. Part of my problem with Oathbringer is that I was really hyper conscious of it. I could feel like, okay, this is going to be delayed until the very end, and then this thread of plot is not going to coincide with this thread of plot until the very end, and it started to feel a little bit more convenient. In Words of Radiance, there's the ticking clock. So the final part I want to discuss is divisions of progress. Just so that for the sake of getting into more detail into this, I'm going to be talking about spoilers until this time. So if you don't want to hear spoilers, just jump to, for Oathbringer, just jump to this time and there you go. You know, trying to liberate the town of Kholinar. This whole sequence is so interesting to me because I feel like building up to it, I was so excited. I was like, man, this is going to be great. We have all of our characters that we love together. You know, there's going to be some interesting tension between Shallan and Kaladin and Adolin and Elokar, you know, is trying to redeem himself. But we're totally left out of the loop. And then when we get there, you know, it kind of reminded me of like the build up to like an action movie, or in Aliens, the military is coming back and Ripley's with them and they know something bad is going on the planet. You know, they don't know exactly what it is yet, but they know something's bad. It felt like as soon as they got to Kholinar, it became describing, you know, exactly how this town is working, all of this stuff. And as soon as the characters get there, it seemed like they all split off. They kind of had their own little side quests as soon as they got there. And especially when it felt like, okay, our characters have kind of been separate from each other. Now this is the moment when they can be together. Progress is all divided into little things and they're all separated. We have this goal, but suddenly we have these little side stories that have gotten in the way and distracted us. Well, another example is Shadesmar, which happens right after the Kholinar stuff. There's a lot of focus on just describing this whole new world and figuring out how it works, which can be really fun, but when story threads are unresolved, when it feels like all of the conflict and tension that happened in Kholinar is just put on pause, and we're just like going, what's going on? We don't know. We're left in the dark. It feels frustrating in some ways. That was just It was a massive book with 3 different books inside of it, or 4 different books inside of it. And that's my problem somewhat with Oathbringer. However, it's hard to even blame it because I feel like that's like a Herculean task. I think pacing in novels is one of the most under-discussed topics. The pacing of a scene, the pacing of a paragraph, of a sentence, is just so hard sometimes to sense and hear and get a grip on. Sometimes the pacing of a chapter might be great, which I feel like Sanderson's chapter pacing is wonderful, and he has wonderful little arcs within each chapter and section. But brought all together, some things were way overdeveloped and overdiscussed, and some things were really underdeveloped. It's a topic I wanted to talk about because I haven't talked a lot about Oathbringer. It's one of those books that I enjoyed reading, but I also felt a little weird about it. Anyways, that's what I have to say about it. I hope any of this is interesting. Thank you for watching, and if you want to hear any of my more other opinions, I have them. So thanks for watching. By the way, I have a Patreon now, so that's around. If you want to support the channel, that's hugely appreciated. And yeah, anyways, thank you for watching, and have a good one.